and this might be a little bit of a tangent, but it's a good segue to get to it here. So Ricky is on TikTok. And speaking of scientific communication, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that experience, Ricky, on TikTok and how you balance talking about science in a way that is engaging for an audience that may not include all scientists. How do you do that?
Yeah, that was a funny I guess bonus chapter to my life. So when I was working at Penn, spending a lot of time in the lab, and especially going into times like during the pandemic when I'd be spending a lot of time in lab just completely by myself. There was, this app TikTok that had come out. I was an early adopter. I had already played around with social media a bit and science communication on Instagram and some other platforms and just started communicating with people, kind of the things that go on in our lab, in a research lab, so that people could get a view into what it looks like at its earliest stages. And for many, many months, I was sending these videos out to like 5 people, and I had my little crowd of people like, "Well, this is so cool." And for months, I did that, and it was just enjoyable little conversations back and forth with people. But after that, it started. I had a video take off and get a couple 100,000 views. And then I had a few more videos get a couple 100,000. And I had some videos get a few million views. And I ended up with, I guess 250,000 followers, maybe a little bit more. Instagram grew up to, maybe 15,000, not quite as many, a much wider audience than I, as a scientist, ever in my life anticipated having. And one thing that I never realized I was learning in that is it was some of the best executive training I've ever had in my life. Because you, as a scientist, you sit in a bit of a bubble sometimes around other scientists and how we communicate with each other and how we view different topics. And when you try to communicate no matter how good you are, when you try to communicate a concept to instantaneously several million people, you will find every single way that that can be misunderstood. And you get very immediate feedback. And so over time, I learned very quickly how, even though if you say something that's technically correct, if the audience doesn't get it immediately, go back to the drawing board, figure out another way to explain it so that it can't be misunderstood. And through many iterations of that, it really helped me get better at explaining things, not just that are technically correct, but things that in a way that are easily understandable, and that also have some meaning to people, how to explain topics so that they feel like they have a personal connection to it, or that it actually is influencing their life in some way. And then maybe even more important, for when we're actually pitching to VCs, how do you explain it in a minute, right? How can you explain how the immune system fights off a tumor in a minute and catch them in the first 5 seconds to get their interest? I was doing that just because I enjoyed science communication. I didn't realize how important those skills were going to be down the line, until I started doing this and pitching a lot and realizing how much it helps me. In fact, we had to send Y Combinator as part of our application, a 1 minute video explaining our technology, our company. We were going back and forth, Ananya and I, on how to do it. And I said, hold on, I know how to do this. I do this every other day. And I filmed a TikTok and spliced it together and downloaded it and just sent it to Ananya. And I said, use this. And that's what we used. Clearly, it worked pretty well. We got funded. But that style of communication, that much practice was really a big boost.
Well, it sounds like it was very helpful to get out of the bubble, get used to communicating to a broad general audience who may not understand anything about science, and simplifying and refining your story, which I'm sure is very helpful when speaking to investors who may have the scientific background, but they might not necessarily be very tuned into your specific technology in as much depth as you are. So learning how to communicate to that general audience has knock-on effects to helping refine your pitch and tell it in a concise, sharp, engaging way. Probably more scientific depth for your investors who are potentially in this audience. But it sounds like the way you communicate with the general audience on TikTok is helpful for making things sharp and crisp, getting your tonality down, getting your pacing down. My brother is an influencer as well, so I know that it's really key in a 1-minute pitch to get your phrasing down so that you're understood clearly, so that your pitch is nice and punchy and you get it across quickly and effectively, which is not something that you learn probably in your PhD program or your postdoc. It's something you probably had to teach yourself along the way. And I'm sure both of you have had to learn this in one setting or another, but probably outside of formal training.
Yeah, and you really want to make it, again, easy to understand. You want to have the main takeaways very clear. Because, I mean, when you're on social media, there's 1,000 videos below you that all it takes to get to those potentially more exciting videos is a swipe of the finger. And in the same way, when you're pitching to a VC, I mean, the workload that those poor people have, there's 10, 20 other meetings directly after yours. And so you really want to get those points across quickly, especially after they've just come out of 10 other meetings, right? You want to be able to make it easy for them to digest what you're trying to communicate to them.
Excellent. So going back to the founding of Guardian, what advice would you want to give an entrepreneur in a similar position to you when you were starting through the Activator program as one of the inaugural cohort? What advice would you give to someone who's at the very beginning of their entrepreneurial journey, whether they're inside or outside of Nucleate?
I'll take it real quick while you get your answer together, Ananya. Because I've continued to mentor some of the Nucleate chapters, some of the newer chapters, and some of the others. And actually, one of the first things, the biggest pieces of advice I give them are talk to a lot of people, hundreds of people. If you have a clinical question, try to talk to 100 clinicians. If you have a business question, go out and find other entrepreneurs, other people to talk to, and talk to a lot of them. And there's several reasons for this. Almost everyone you talk to will, in general, give you, roughly one really good piece of advice and one piece of advice that actually doesn't pertain to you that much or isn't relevant to what you're doing. And the only way to figure out which one's which is to talk to 100 people. And it starts to become clear what is the advice that everyone has realized is important and what is the advice that was just that person's personal experience that maybe doesn't actually apply to you as much. And so it helps you get much better at filtering advice as it comes in. And it also makes you much more likely to find the person with the key piece of advice that actually is really helpful to you, that maybe isn't, knowledge that is as widespread as you would hope. And then lastly, it has this nice little side effect of you meet a lot of great people. And when you talk to 100 people, there's always 10 that you just get along with really well, that are super helpful, and they become friends, right? You reached out to them to get some advice, but there's people we reached out to advice that I just genuinely enjoyed talking to, and we've become friends. And, having a side effect of developing a couple good friends is always a nice thing.
Yeah, I have two big pieces of advice. The first is very directly related to what Ricky just said. And it is find the people that you trust and keep them really close. This is so hard. This is so hard. I cannot underscore that enough. And you need to find the people who can give you advice, whether it is 11 a.m. or 11 p.m. and you are panicked about some email that you just got and you just need to call someone and talk about it who's done it before. Find those people and keep them very close. And if you can, bring them onto your team in an official way, especially and when I say find those people and find the people that you trust, I mean people who've done this before, people in industry who have, whether they're serial entrepreneurs, pharma people, whatever it is, people who know what it is that you're going through because they've done it, ideally a few times. So I met someone the other day that was like, there's no new mistakes. He does a lot of mentoring. And it's true. Like all the stuff that we're going through, people have gone through before and people will go through after us. And if you can find the people who've gone through it before, they can just help you head off a lot of pain. They can just help you head off a lot of pain. And if you can somehow bring them into your company, whether as an advisor, a consultant, a board member, one of the best pieces of advice that I got really early was, as people doing this for the first time early in our careers, we have to borrow the credibility of the people around us. So if we have people around us who have done it before, done it well, learned a lot, and those people are out there talking about, they're excited about the science and excited about us and this company, that has a different weight to people. And the second piece of advice I'd give, because again, this is really hard, be very excited about what you're working on. There is absolutely no guarantee of success in science. As much as we wish there was, there's no guarantee of success. So you have to be so excited to work on what you're working on, because that way, even if the technology does not succeed, you still learn a lot. And like Ricky said, meet people who care about the same stuff that you do.
That's a fantastic answer. And again, going back to the theme that we talked about earlier, is that you're not alone on an island founding your company, that you can leverage the experience of, to Ricky's point, hundreds of people. It sounds like you're going to have a broader, field of people that you're going to be in touch with generally. But then when you find those ones that are the best and the most helpful, you keep those folks close. And to the point that we talked about earlier, it's not just about how technically gifted they are, it's also how dedicated they are, how loyal they are, how good they are to work with, that you enjoy working with them, which is also critical because you're putting your whole life into this. You're going to need that 11 p.m. or midnight call when you're dealing with something stressful, and you want someone who's going to be productive in that conversation rather than stressing you out further by being negative about it. So noticing that theme throughout all of the conversation. It is a good segue to talk about the long-term vision for Guardian. 5-10 years down the road, you're in the clinic at a minimum in melanoma. What is the long-term vision for Guardian Bio and dendritic cell therapy?
I personally want dendritic cells to be what everyone is talking about. They are, I've said it before and I will say it again, they are critically important cells. The fact that they are dysfunctional in like all cancer patients, especially in the solid tumor world, it limits the efficacy of something as novel as checkpoint inhibitors or some of the new cancer vaccines to as classic as chemo. This dysfunction bottlenecks all of those things. I would love for people to appreciate that and see the breakthroughs in that area. I believe that if we can crack this antigen presentation compartment, and I'm not going to say it's easy, right? But if we can crack this antigen presentation compartment, I fully believe it could change the way cancer is treated. And this isn't necessarily a 5 or 10-year plan, but when I look down the road, it could, if we can make really good dendritic cell therapies, and Ricky and I really think about Guardian Bio as almost more of a regenerative medicine approach because we're restoring this antigen presentation compartment. We could have, lower doses of toxic treatments because these cells are capable of working with the body better. We could have more and more earlier line therapeutics that see curative responses in the longer term. It just will hopefully change the way we treat this disease.
Yeah, I think in that, I guess we'll call that medium long-term outlook. The thing that excited me most when we first started putting all of this together was that how close this I thought was to clinic, right? I was working on a lot of really kind of advanced out there stuff at Penn that, felt like it was going to take a lot of development, a lot of all sorts of different technologies to come together. And it was maybe 12 years away from the clinic from what I had seen from other things that were that advanced. This one, from all of the work that had been done and put together and everything that had been learned from the previous clinical attempts, felt like, there were some things that needed to be worked out, but it was ready to go to the clinic and it was ready to start making a pretty rapid impact in patient lives. And I think, the clinical plan that we've put together is a testament to that. And so in 5 years, that's what I see is already having the clinical data back from the first trial, expanding into other trials. That's what I'm most excited about, is seeing this in patients. And that was part of my early excitement as well.
In 10 years, at least one approved drug out there treating patients and helping save lives.
And then many more to come from that.
Yep.
Exactly.
All right. Pivoting to the future of biotech and improving diversity in the field. Forbes put out an article in December of 2022 showing, this is an older topic. This is not news. But the topic was stating that biotech has limited diversity. African Americans represent only 6% of the workforce. Asian employees represent 21%. Hispanic/Latinx employees represent 7%, and Native American employees are less than 1%. This lack of diversity is amplified at the C-suite, where people of color make up only 24% of executive teams and 28% of CEOs. So the question is, what do you think the industry can do better to support underrepresented minorities in biotech?
So it's funny because when Ricky and I saw this question, the same story sprung to both of our minds. And it was from a conference that we'd attended like a year and a half ago or something like that. And we're talking to this group of people, and I asked this guy a question, and he gave a fairly long answer, and he didn't look at me once. He directed that answer straight at Ricky, like literally did not even glance in my direction one time when he was answering it. It was honestly kind of wild. And then Ricky and I walked away from that conversation, and I remember, telling Ricky, I was like, can I say something? And he immediately was like, is it that guy was obnoxious? And again, it goes back to have people around you that you trust. Like, I honestly really appreciate that Ricky had called that out before I even needed to say it. I deeply appreciate that in him. But it goes to show that there's just a lot of, whether it's overt, subtle, but there can be a lot of disrespect that comes with when you're a minority. I'm young, I'm a woman, I'm an immigrant. There's a lot that goes into that. And I don't know what the confounding variables are between that. I do think looking around, it's much rare to see women in positions of leadership in biotech than it is necessarily to see people who are Indian. Although other minorities are certainly much less representative than Indians might be. But there's a lot of those little things. I think it's almost like death by a thousand cuts. It's not necessarily always big things that are overt. There's a lot of these little things that continue to sting and sting and sting. And if they build, they can really, make people not want to do this, to be very frank. And I think when I think about, well, maybe I'll let Ricky chat about what his thoughts are generally before I give my 2 cents on how we can work to improve this.
All right, I'll speak briefly only because I want to leave you time to finish it up since you have far more experience here. But I think it's particularly dangerous in something like the startup world, I feel like, where a lot of times money is controlled by a smaller group of people. And it's common to invest, whether it is, explicitly said out loud or whether it's conscious or subconscious, through pattern matching very often. And if you don't, if diverse people have kind of been excluded from, for many years from those successes that came before, then even if you're not trying to let that innervate your thinking, if you're pattern matching based on those previous successes where that was kind of the norm, it only makes sense that pattern would permeate into the next generation and the next generation and the next generation of funding. And so, there's very obvious examples like Ananya mentioned, where you could kind of, everybody around could see it happening, where people were treating her and I differently. But I think where it's probably the most dangerous is where you can't see that. And I think you have to be, pattern matching makes sense as a way to people to default into how they make their investments. But I think it's really important to keep front of mind what that can potentially leave open.
Yeah. And I'd say I'm a big believer in the little things, adding up to make big differences. So when I think of the biggest thing I would love, not just the industry, but individuals to do to support underrepresented minorities, would be to call it out. When you see that type of stuff, call it out. And, don't be afraid of what other people think or the backlash. You can do it in a gentle way. You can ask a question, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be, really aggressive or whatever, but calling it out and recognizing those little things that add up to really big things is something just small that I would love the industry to work on. And then in big ways, I'd like to see more, again, I come from an MBA background. So at the end of the day, done a lot of stuff with like spreadsheets and finance and budgets. And I believe if you really want to increase things like diversity, you need to put, that needs to be aligned in your budget, how you're thinking about engaging, whether it's, Ricky and I have talked a lot about pipelines. So even going to high schools and things like that and helping set up those pipelines? Or internally to your companies, what's your pay transparency like? How are you talking about different people in different levels? Are you paying women less because they tend to not ask for raises as much? Like being honest as companies about that, using as many data-driven metrics as you can about that, because it's hard to argue with data versus, I don't want to be talking about my feelings necessarily in a room. That's honestly probably just going to make it worse as a woman. So if I can come in and show with data what's happening and how to improve it, that is just so much more powerful.
Going back to the solutions part, I think inspiring young people to go into biotech, I think is really important, because both of you to some degree had some sort of inspiration earlier on in your careers. And I think that outreach component is critically important. So reaching out to folks from underrepresented backgrounds where they are earlier on in their career, I think can pay big dividends for the long term of the field. And I will say, to my understanding, there's a lot more women coming into universities nowadays. There's a lot more recruiting specifically based on diversity, although with the Supreme Court decision recently, maybe it's a little bit different, but still we're expecting, greater diversity on college campuses, which I think is great for the pipeline. And I do think there is a spotlight being put on the funding environment, in that minority founders and women are not getting the same proportion of funding that they're likely due. So hopefully that also changes and builds more startups like your own that are founded by women and minorities that have a chance to succeed and inspire the next generation.
That's the hope. And I will say, I have a white male co-founder. And that is a little bit of a confounding variable with us. Because I remember, this is more Ricky's story to tell, but I remember he'd gone to a dinner. And after the dinner, he'd gone out with a couple of the guys there who were in VCs in an industry. And we were talking about it the next day. And I was like, I can't do that. I can't go get drunk with a bunch of people that may lead to a potential conversation around investment in the future. And those systemic things, I do think we need more conversations around how do we address it. Again, it kind of goes back to Ricky's point about a lot of the people in the decision-making positions don't look like or come from, even because there's also a huge socioeconomic aspect of this. They don't come from the same places as underrepresented minorities. So how do we dig into some of those just systemic things?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, to the point, the white folks, myself included, can be supportive and allies to the broader population, underrepresented minorities and women, and make sure that we do our part to support that as well. It's also a key part of this. So pivoting to the technology side of the future of biotech, when you're thinking broadly about biotech innovation, outside of your own company here for a minute, we're expecting huge changes in the obesity market. AI has exploded in interest, although there may be some hype there too. And there's expected to be large implications for the next generation of therapies that come out, in addition to cell therapies like your own that you're developing. So what are some trends outside of your own field that you are following that you think could have big impact in the next 10 years?
I'll say one thing kind of broadly and one thing a little specifically. One is just with the technologies available to us today that have not been available to us before, I hope and expect to see many more curative therapies rather than just treatment. Curative and prevention, I think, is, again, it's not a specific trend, but as a category, what I hope and expect our industry to drive more towards, given what we have available to us today, are allowing us to understand and address root cause of disease. And a specific trend I have been really interested in is AI, but not necessarily for drug discovery. I really want to see how AI will make an impact in how we select patients and run clinical trials. I feel like we have this giant funnel of ways that we discover novel molecules, and then it all starts to bottleneck around clinical deployment, whether it's manufacturing or actually clinical trials, because we only have a limited amount of patients out there, thankfully, but more and more drugs to potentially treat them. And I'm really excited to see AI more help us decide which drugs should get into the clinic, or even help streamline our clinical experiences, help physicians and help care providers with clinical trials and clinical deployment. Hopefully that'll also help some accessibility issues that our field has always had.
Yeah. There's a lot of certainly a lot of changes I'd like to see made to healthcare, many of which I'm not qualified to figure out. But what I can speak on is in innovation, which I think, there's a lot of opportunity. And one of the things that I see starting to happen that I'm very excited about, and I hope continues, is kind of the democratization of these early stages of discovery and developing therapeutics or products or whatever, be it, widgets that help people. And I think it's been, in biotech especially, incredibly expensive to develop anything, which has really narrowed down the teams and the people that get to do it. And I think now you see things like sequencing. I think with what AI could be capable of in helping analyze large data sets that have already been produced to find new findings, a lot of these things are starting to be more accessible to more universities, or even outside of universities and incubator settings. And, maybe hopefully someday somebody can learn bioinformatics and go to a library and discover something great, places where you can have more of the actual first event of discovering something that can be useful and starting to develop it happening across more people in more places. And I think there needs to be a little more support for that. There's still some way to go in helping people not only discover, but begin to build that to where they can get more capital. But I already see that coming together, and hopefully biotech can get somewhere a little closer to what the tech industry has been able to accomplish, that with relatively little, you can accomplish pretty big things, and get a lot of people behind you and a lot of resources to good ideas. And hopefully that continues, and hopefully gets more people more chances, which means more ideas being tested.
Another on-brand idea for Nucleate to expand.
I know, that's why I've stayed in touch with it. I think it's preaching to the choir here. I'll stop.
No, it's definitely true. And I think that providing these resources helps de-risk those early stage of startups. And I'm sure a lot of people have ideas and they've been, didn't have the resources or the mentors or the examples that they could leverage. And I'm sure it was super helpful for you guys along the way. And certainly there are people who have ideas that may have started, but then stopped because they didn't know how to navigate things. So I think Nucleate is helping to solve that. And to your point, there needs to be more of it. It needs to have broader reach. And additionally, there needs to be a good funding environment to be supportive of that broader biotech ecosystem. Great. So we covered most of our core content here, but let's pivot a little bit to your passions outside of biotech. So Ricky, I think it'd be good to start with you. You talked about your passion for the water and the ocean. So let's start there. What are your passions? What are you doing for fun? What do you do to relax and unplug outside of work?
Yeah, so I've always loved the ocean. Even though I moved out of the water for research and into labs, I've always tried to stay as closely connected as I can. So I grew up surfing. I sailed in college and still sail. I actually have a small sailboat that I have to repair almost every day, usually. And I just love being around the water as much as I can. I'm glad most of the biotech hubs happen to be on coasts. It makes my life a little more enjoyable. And so, yeah, that's a big one. And just, exploring. I like mountain climbing and doing some mountaineering, things like that. Usually all hobbies that make Ananya incredibly nervous as I'm out there. But it's what I really love doing. So.
What did you say you did the other day? An open, ocean swim? And I was like, nope, I don't like
Yeah, we
that.
did a few mile ocean swim. Ananya loves to look at the ocean. She's not a big toucher of the ocean. She likes to stay on the shore.
The ocean freaks me out. It's so big and so unknown. Yeah, honestly, I don't relax. I'm just constantly stressed. Kind of joking, but also kind of not joking. I have a harder time. I'm just not very good at unplugging. I've never been super good at unplugging. But it is something that, again, Ricky and I have talked about more, because this is hopefully that's something that we'll be doing for a very long time. And it's just unsustainable to always be stressed and not be unplugging once in a while. Like it is, you have to think about it as a battery. You can't drive it to zero. You need to, be able to recharge fairly regularly if you want to perform at a high level. So I've been trying more. I do like the outdoors. I'm glad, it's now getting nice here in Boston, so I can actually go outside and do like walks or hikes on the weekend once in a while. Gotten more into audiobooks. I commute into Cambridge via the T, so I've been trying to listen to more audiobooks on my commute as ways to just try to separate from once in a while. But yeah, it's been a journey learning how to do that, and I've continued to learn.
And it's important for, like you said, recharging, refreshing, taking a step back sometimes. And that's a lot of times where great ideas happen. I'm sure everyone can attest. Sometimes you're taking a shower and then in pops your head an idea because you've unplugged from the normal grind. So it's important to take that recharge. Good segue, Ananya. Are there any good books, movies, TV shows, stories that you find particularly interesting that you enjoy?
Oh, I feel like most people will want me to give like a business book recommendation. Honestly, I have a really hard time reading nonfiction books. Audio has been a little bit easier, but I just have a hard time really paying attention. So a lot of the like books I read or shows I watch tend to be like guilty pleasure type of stuff. I love a good detective show, or frankly, love a good like rom-com show. Big fan of those. I really think of them as guilty pleasures. Let me think for a second if I do have like good business book recommendations. One
It doesn't
book
have to be a business book. Just any book.
Just a regular book.
Something you enjoy, yeah.
Okay, actually, I do have two recommendations that are two of my favorite books that I also think about a lot every day, even in my professional life. One is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It is, oh God, it's so good. I love every part of it. And one of the most famous quotes from there is "Do not panic, don't panic." So I do think about that a lot in startup world. And the second book I recommend to most people I talk to, especially for the last like 2-3 years, is by Kurt Vonnegut. It's called Play Your Piano, and it's about a dystopian world in which the most important people are managers and engineers, and there's just a huge amount of automation, and makes you think a lot about what it takes to be happy and how much of a role feeling useful plays in our dignity as humans. And it's kind of scary because we're moving towards a more automated world. So especially now, I recommend that book a lot. Kurt Vonnegut, just every time I read a book, I need like 2 weeks to recover from it, but in the best way.
Amazing. Ricky, do you have any?
I'd say my favorite reading is probably nature reviews. I love how they standardized all of their illustrations to be very consistent across
Oh my
reviews.
God.
And
Did they pay you to say that?
no, but one of my friends is an editor there at NA, so
Okay.
she'll hopefully enjoy that. But yeah, I mean, outside of, honestly, I feel like I read so much science that I'm just done with reading. So I actually rarely read for pleasure. My guilty pleasure is YouTube.
Okay.
I religiously follow a few different YouTube channels, some of them sailing and some cooking. And then now that God, I'm getting older now, some gardening ones. They're very, very
Oh
low
my
key.
gosh,
For all the
one time-
dangerous stuff I do, my YouTube channels are very, very chill.
One time I asked Ricky if he could only grow like one vegetable in his yard, what would it be? And I thought I broke him. Like he literally went so quiet. We were on a walk and he just stopped talking. And I was like, are you okay?
Picking a favorite
Different
channel.
ones together. You don't pick one.
It's too intense of a question. No scientific question I've ever asked him has had that kind of response. That one broke him a little bit.
Yeah.
Amazing. So for our last question, we take this one from Guy Raz at How I Built This. How much of your success can be attributed to luck and how much skill or hard work? Go ahead first, Ananya.
Okay, this might be a weird answer, but when I first saw this question, Sam, I thought of this song that we used to warm up to and come out to in volleyball when I was in high school. And I don't even think I really remember the name, but the lyrics were like, this is 10% luck, 20% skill, 15% concentrated power of will, 5% pleasure, 50% pain, and 100% reason to remember the name. I think remember the name was like the title of the song. But I honestly think that's true. It is, of course, you have to, there's an
Hearing you
element of
casually say that is just funny, Ananya. I only
what?
heard the song. Go ahead.
First thing that came to
It
my
is good.
mind.
It is good. Yeah.
And I thought that the breakdown it listed was decently accurate. Like
Yeah.
there is an element of luck to everything. There's a hard work and a skill element of it. But a part of this game is just the endurance of being able to maintain that and get through all of the hard stuff, which can be quite painful.
Yeah, I'll use a incredibly crude analogy. I mean, sometimes it feels like foraging, right? Just going out in the forest and lifting rocks and seeing if there's anything to eat under them. And when you're like trying to find different breakthroughs in different areas. And, a lot of times you don't have control whether you're going to lift up a rock and something tasty is under there. But the more rocks you lift up, the more likely you are to find something. And so, we've had incredible, I think, luck as well in a lot of the preclinical data that we've gotten. But we've also gotten unlucky. But luckily, we had plans for that. And so we were able to get back to the drawing board, lift up more rocks, and eventually just keep going until we got lucky again. And so, it always comes down to luck, luck being a kind of placeholder word for variables you can't control falling, your way. And there's always variables you can't control. But if you just keep going and keep hitting it, variables are always changing, and eventually you're going to have them line up. And so,
Well, it sounds like you, to some degree, create your own luck to the degree that you can.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, on that's the podcast. Ananya, Ricky, thank you so much for your time today and joining us.
Thanks, Sam.
This is so much fun. Thanks, Sam.